Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Svend Brinkmann, author of The Experience Society. It's published by Reaction, one of my favorite presses, and it'll be released later this month. Svend was a professor in the Department of Communication and Psychology at Aalborg University in Denmark. His works include Think, Stand Firm, and The Joy of Missing Out, amongst many others. He's appeared in documentaries. He presents television programs as well, including the Meaningful Life series. So what is the Experience Society? Are we constantly observing our lives as we experience our airplane trip to Venice, where we experience St. Mark's Square or the Grand Canal? Do we experience Taylor Swift's performance, or do we just watch her perform? And as Svend relates to the beginning of the book, and I've experienced, should we tell anyone if our bathroom experience was either meaningful or aesthetically pleasing, rather than simply the process of elimination of waste products? So Svend and I are about to experience our conversation. So let's begin. Hi, Svend. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So is this conversation that we are having actually something that we can accurately describe to others tomorrow as an experience?
Well, there is an experiential aspect to a conversation, but primarily it's something we do. It's something we conduct. You ask me questions and I try to reply. I might ask you something. It's something that goes on between us. And I think it's wrong, it's misguided to reduce that to individual or subjective experiences. Conversations happen between people. We do them. Of course, you can say that we experience them as well, but I would argue that it's not the most important aspect concerning conversations or anything else we do and practice as human beings.
And you said subjective, and that's a word you used often in your book, and that I thought about as I read it. So yes, if we explain our experience of this conversation to someone else, it's a subjective retelling, obviously, because we only have what's here. We have no choice with regard to that. But what is it about subjectivity? And you say that at the end, you say people might be irritated with you from that last chapter. But what is it about subjectivity that irritates you so much?
Well, I'm a psychologist and I'm a professor of psychology doing research. And you could say that, well, I should be concerned with human subjectivity because that's the subject matter of psychology. But I'm a bit worried that we reduce all sorts of processes in the world, what happens between us, societal structures, ethics, the big world that we're part of, to subjective happenings within our minds, confined within our skulls. You used the expression just before that we only have what's in here. And it's exactly that picture of psychology, if you will, that I try to challenge. I don't think we have just what is in here. I think we have a rich world outside of us that we know, not through subjective experience alone, but through actions, through investigations and studies. So I think we have been misled by a particular view of the relationship between human beings and the world. We have this dichotomy of the subject, the knowing subject on the one hand, and the objects of the world outside of us. And we are taught by modern neuroscience, modern psychology, that all we can know about is really the contents of our mind, the inner subjective world. And as I see it, this is simply just a reiteration of 17th century epistemology. The idea that we're never able to reach out into the world and know it. All we can know about is our minds. and the contents of our minds. So everyone is captured within his or her own subjective sphere. And this sounds like, some crazy philosophical idea, very abstract, very far from our everyday lives. But I think it has entered our everyday understanding of what it means to be human, what it means to understand others. And I think it's deeply harmful, this view of ourselves as, being trapped within our subjective minds. I think we need to break free from that misguided view of humans and understand that we actually live in a shared world. It's a rather simple thesis that I advocate. But in addition to all these epistemological and psychological points, I think there's also, the whole political situation of the world, where we have difficulties in meeting each other in a common world, in a shared world. So it has all sorts of ramifications. This misguided idea that we modern men and women build upon.
There's certain things I read in the book that made me just kind of think backward and backward and backward. So when you were talking about, which I experience every day, people in a bus line or waiting for a train or at the airport, there is no discourse. There's in America, there's very little civil discourse anyway, but everyone's holding their phones. No one's actually communicating with the person next to them. Families at a restaurant, all four of them are on their devices. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. But then we can go back to, you cite William James as saying, does consciousness exist? And then you go from the ancient Greeks to Sartre to Kierkegaard. So the phones, yes, but when did all this happen? When did it begin to happen?
In the conventional history of ideas, history of philosophy, the culprit is usually Descartes, the French philosopher inaugurating modern philosophy around the first half of the 17th century. And Descartes made a break with scholastic philosophy, medieval philosophy that had built upon Aristotle in particular. And with Aristotle, cognition is about knowing the world. It's about reaching out into the world and grasping what there is. And then we had, after the Greeks, after medieval philosophy, we had the scientific revolution of the Renaissance and this mechanical worldview saying that, well, all that really is in the world out there, are just mechanical processes. And so no colors, no sounds, no values, no meaning, no purpose. So where are all these things that we live and die for? And the answer was, they're subjective, they're within our minds, and we might project them onto this neutral world, but it's just an illusion. They are really just in here. And then with Descartes and later philosophers, they took even a step further and said, well, everything we can know about the world are just subjective contents of our minds, because what else is there? Whenever we know something, whenever we taste something, whenever we hear something, it's all in our minds. And then we have modern neuroscience, the brain sciences, saying pretty much the same thing. Well, some of them are much more sophisticated, and some of them would also agree with me. But the mainstream of the neuroscience that will say, well, that's true. Our understanding of the world is just a construction made by our brain. And what I taste when I taste an apple is really not the apple, because I can never really know if there is an apple, because the apple is out there in the world. So what I taste is my experience of the apple. And if you walk down the street and eat an apple and someone says, so what are you doing? And you say, well, I'm tasting this experience of my apple. The other person will say, what? No, you're eating the apple. I can see that. Why are you saying that you taste the experience of the apple? So, the man in the street, which is sort of a figure in philosophy, trying to, whenever we test our theories, it's always good to begin with a certain level of common sense. And this famous man or woman in the street would object and say something is wrong when we double the world in this way. We can actually taste apples. We can actually talk with other people. We can actually know about the world. So I know that this is rather a long story of ideas, but it began basically with, the scientific revolution making this split between an objective world out there and a subjective world in here. And it was quite quickly clear that, well, the end point of making this break and making this distinction is to say that everything is subjective. Because, why would something be out there and other things in here when all we can know about is what's in here? So this has sort of, I would say, traveled into folk psychology, traveled into, the way people talk. It has been, coupled also with a certain ethical attitude, which has very good intentions, which is about, I cannot really say what other people experience. I can only say something about my own experiences. So I should, for ethical reasons, also try to stick to my own subjective viewpoint. But I would say, although the intentions are good behind this way of talking, I would say the consequences are quite bad, because we end up sitting each in our little prison of subjective experience, not being able to reach each other, not being able to address a common world. And I think we see, really harmful political consequences of this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to continue talking about a Cartesian duality with you, but you've brought it back down to earth, and I think we should stay for a bit. You talk about, I wouldn't bring it up, but you talk about Trump in the early portions of your book, and I thought of the right wing in Denmark and the Danish People's Party, and I can't pronounce this, Nyborgerlige, the other party in Denmark.
Oh, yeah. They actually collapsed, so they don't exist anymore. But
that's what I was going to say. Is that,
New Borgerlige, yeah.
Or your bad people are not doing so well, whereas in the United States, and I'll just give you one example because it's perfect for the book. Yesterday, Trump was talking about the Supreme Court's decision that said freedom of speech allows someone to burn the American flag because it's an expression of speech, and our Constitution protects that. And he said that decision was just sad. He didn't analyze the decision or particularly address the decision at all. But more than half of the people in America, the ones who voted for him, will agree that the decision is sad. But why is it sad? Why is that the word he would use? And you talk about how his language is actually creating what?
Yeah, at least trying to create, and to some extent quite successfully, the same impression of what the world is in everyone else than that he has. And of course, Trump is probably the most obvious example, but even in Denmark, this small country that I come from, very peaceful in many ways, we have a center-left government now. And I also have the example in our book that our current prime minister, when she began the previous election process, she said, we need to talk about security in our country. People are not feeling safe, so we should do something about crime and violent crime. And she referred to this report that had just come out, that people were scared because of crime. But what the report also said was that crime rates are falling. This is actually quite equivalent, as I understand it, to the US, where, Trump, puts in, what is it, the National Guard or something like that?
Yeah, and he basically invaded our capital.
Yeah, which from my perspective looks very, very frightening. Arguing that crime is really bad, but it's also falling in the US. So there is this mismatch between what people experience and the realities. And I would just say that, politicians ought to if they are worthy of, being elected, they are supposed to, of course, take seriously what people experience, but also if they want to be leaders, try to make us all understand what the facts are. So if the facts are that crime rates are falling, they should also, be vocal about that and say, oh, that's strange. There's this mismatch between what people feel, what they experience, and what the realities are. Maybe we should look at the realities and not just, we have this expression in Danish, maybe you do in English as well. When you blow the fire like this, you give it oxygen and it becomes worse. So that's what politicians do now in our democracies, which are, you could say, I use this word in the book, an democracy, because emotions are what politicians aim at, trying to stir up. We see all these consequences now, especially in the US, where I don't need to tell you this, of course, you experience it every day, I suppose. But people basically living in different worlds and not being able to connect to a shared world.
Yeah, as I said, in the absence of civil discourse, it's very hard to make any progress on a moral, ethical, or even legal question. And sometimes when I talk to people, I ask them whether it's a climate change person or a consciousness person, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you cautiously optimistic? And normally I might ask you that question, probably not in this interview, but everything that you're talking about has changed so dramatically in the past 5 or 10 years and will change arithmetically more so in the next 2 years with regard to artificial intelligence, deep fakes. What we were talking about, people being engrossed for 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day in a subjective reality that David Chalmers seems to extol. So in the final part of your book, when you try to explain why we should be going in a somewhat different direction, do you have any I am asking you, do you have any optimism that this will be ameliorated in some way rather than just get worse and worse?
Well, my book is actually the third title that I have come across with this title, The Experienced Society. Yeah. The German sociologist Gerhard Schulze wrote one book in the early 90s on the, Erlebnisgesellschaft, as it's called in German, the Experienced Society. Trying to analyze these processes, before social media, before Trump, before all these things. And also, warning us about possible consequences. And then the British sociologist Miles, I think about 10 years ago, wrote also a book on the Experienced Society, focusing mainly on, consumerism. And now in my book, I also have, these new technologies, artificial intelligence that we need to take into account that has happened since. So I think it's a critique that we need to keep alive, because with artificial intelligence, with our lives on the internet, with all these algorithms that suck us into, this strange mix of an attention economy and an experience economy. We give our attention in order to receive experiences, and we're sort of locked in these sorts of exchanges. So I think we need to keep it alive. The idea that it's not the only way to think about what it means to live a life. What it means to live a life is not the same as having experiences constantly. It's not the same as living in a subjective bubble of experiences. We can actually go out and meet each other, develop knowledge together, engage in human practices of art, science, our democratic practices, and so on. So, I don't know if that means that I'm an optimist or a pessimist, because it seems that these processes related to the experience society are just intensifying. But since the critique is still here, and many more people are now aware that we have problems, I think it's not going to. We're not going to give up. Those of us who believe that there is another story to tell about life than the one told by very, very different characters like Descartes and the tech industry, because they're in a way they're closely aligned, and we don't really know it. But I think we need to understand that what is happening now, the most contemporary developments in technology really draw upon an understanding of human beings that are 400 years old. So that's why they can get away with it, because it's so ingrained in our way of thinking.
When you talked about the British author's book and the consumerism aspect of it, you spend a page or two, which I thought was interesting, talking about expensive cars and why people buy them. And I thought about a number of reasons why. One is that, you're born with nothing, you work really hard, and you feel like, I feel like I deserve this. I'm not really interested in impressing other people, but I feel like this is something I deserve. Or you're born with all the money in the world and you just want to impress people, and you go and buy a Lamborghini. As you said, the speed limit is whatever, but you have a car that can drive 3 times that fast. So coming at it from that side, from the consumerism side, yeah, and you talk about qualia too, which is kind of what we're talking about if we talk about cars. But why is that important? Why did you put that in there?
Well, because consumer society is about selling experiences more than anything else. That's why the car example to me is so obvious in a way. Many years ago, when I was a student, I became interested in these things when I took a course at Oxford University, where I was, with Richard Sennett. He's a famous sociologist studying the corrosion of character in late modern capitalism and so on. And he had all these interesting examples of car manufacturing, teaching us that, you can have an Audi car and a Skoda car. These are common brands in Europe, at least. One is German, high quality. The other one is a Czech car, and they merged at some point. So they began to, produce the cars using the same platform. And some of these consumer sociologists, they calculated that, materially, the cars were, I think, something like 96% identical. They were pretty much the same car. But the Audi cost 2 or 3 times as much as the Skoda. Although, they had the same performance, the same materials, even the same quality. The only difference was, one had one logo, the other had another logo, basically. How is this possible? I mean, I think we need to wonder, are humans really that stupid that we want to pay 2 or 3 times as much for the same thing? And in a way, the answer is yes, humans really are that stupid. But we have become that stupid in this experience society, because what we buy and what we're willing to pay that much money in order to get is the experience of owning the expensive car. And of course, that plays into all sorts of, status, hierarchies, all this, the distinctions between people. The French sociologist Bourdieu talked a lot about how not just economy, but also cultural capital is what separates people from each other in different classes. And if you have that kind of money, it seems that most people are actually willing to spend it on this really strange experience, the experience of being someone who owns this car rather than that car. And this is just the example with the cars. but it's, you know, everything, where we live, the houses we buy and live in, the clothes we wear, the food we eat. It's everything in our culture is geared towards consuming in terms of experiences. We still have industrial production, of course, and you could say that we're still living in some sort of industrial society, but on top of that, we have this commodification of experiences that we really strive for, and which is the leading force of our economies. These same sociologists, they can tell us that many big companies, they have budgets for advertising that are much bigger than their budgets for developing new products, researching, even manufacturing things. So what we are faced with today is not just producing things as reliably as possible and as cheap as possible, but producing desire in people to own certain things because it will give them an experience.
It's funny you talk about another way of coming at this. Is I was watching TV last night and there was this ad and I couldn't even tell what it was for. It just showed green fields and the sun and people basking in it, and it was for Constellation Energy. And what they do basically is pollute the earth with coal plants and oil refineries. But the commercial extolled the fact that they were providing clean energy to the world. First of all, I'm not going to buy a coal plant from them. In fact, I don't even know what I would be buying from them. But the ad made me feel, if I was as stupid as most people, that this is a company that's doing wonderful things for the world, and I really should like them a lot. But I don't know how otherwise, other than the institutional aspect of the advertising, how am I ever going to be interfacing with them? But that kind of ad, that kind of experience, we are subjected to constantly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there is this further dimension that I think is important, namely that, in the good old days, you saved money and then you wanted to buy some object. And when you bought the object, it was supposed to last. You bought this chair, and when you died, your children would inherit this chair and their children would inherit it. And, I know I'm romanticizing a lot here, but that was the ideal, to buy things that would last. And when you have an experience economy in a consumer society, the problem is that experiences don't last. They are so fleeting. So you need new things all the time in order to feed your thirst, your hunger for new experiences. Products are sold with this kind of, they call it planned obsolescence. They're not supposed to last, and you're supposed to desire the next version of the smartphone. I remember going from, I think it was an iPhone 3 to an iPhone 6, and I think I now have an 11 or 13, I don't even know. Not because the old ones stopped working, so in a way they would last, but because the apps wouldn't work anymore. So they're not supposed to, last. I'm supposed to desire a new version. And this is connected to what people are calling FOMO, that this fear of missing out that we have nowadays, which is, psychologically quite harmful. You mentioned the ad before. I think it's my favorite ad. It's a few years old, and I don't think they have this slogan any longer, but Intercontinental, this huge chain of hotels, they used to say, you can't have a favorite place until you've seen them all. Do you live an intercontinental life? And you only live an intercontinental life when you're on the move. So, and what they're really telling you is that you can never have a favorite place because you can never see all places. And you're not supposed to have a favorite place, because if your favorite place is this nice chair that you have in the corner, you sit in a nice room with lots of books, maybe in a comfortable chair. If that's your favorite place, they're not going to make money. from you. So you have to be dissatisfied with where you are in order for you to be an interesting consumer to them. It's quite innocent as a slogan for hotels, but if you translate it into other areas of life, such as you cannot have a favorite job until you've had them all, well, you can never really connect and engage with what you do because there might be something better. You can never have a favorite wife or husband or partner until you had them all. Well, it's an absurd idea, but it's the same kind of FOMO, related to the idea that what is really valuable in our lives are experiences. So when my experience of the chair, the job, the other person becomes boring, or I'm in doubt, maybe there's something better out there for me, I desire something new. So I come from Denmark, and we have this, I would almost say, national philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, the grandfather of existentialism. And he didn't talk about the fear of missing out. He didn't talk about FOMO, but he talked about aesthetic despair. The despair you feel when you live your life according to the aesthetic sphere. And the aesthetic for Kierkegaard was, experiences, the interesting, the new. And the problem with that is, if you live according to the aesthetic, you are quickly bored and you need something new, something else. So you can never commit to anything outside your subjective desires. And that is not a way to live for humans, but it's the way that we are taught to live, I would say, by, well, everything we've been talking about, really. Consumerism, big tech, algorithms, politicians. So it's a huge culture, really, that we're in.
It's funny, out of all that you've said thus far, the most evocative word that you've used is chair to me, because I was able to understand, and this may be what's the difference between an experience and a communication understanding. When you said chair, I realized, okay, there's a wooden chair. My father gave it to me, just like I still have my father's hammer and screwdriver. When I hold them, kind of makes you feel like you're going to cry, actually. Mm-hmm. But it's funny because this morning before the interview, I went to get lab work. And because of my nature, hypochondriacal, I assume that every test will show that I have some type of terminal illness. So now I'll be on pins and needles until the tests come back. And then if they're fine, I don't feel happy. It's only that I expect them to be bad. Then I will realize, yes, this is what's going to happen to me. Not my point. My point is that after I left, I walked outside. It was sunny. The trees were there. I looked up and I stood there and I just looked, and everything was exactly the way it should be. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of Kurt Vonnegut, the American author, who had an uncle who was just, I don't know what he was. He was a mechanic in a gas station, and he used to take him fishing, and they would be sitting there in the sun, maybe not catching anything, but the lines would be in the water. And every once in a while, maybe every month, the uncle would turn to Kurt and go, "This is fine." Mm. And by saying "this is fine," that creates an experience. Before he says it, it's just the chair.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. But, when you described how you went out, you looked up into the sky, it was beautiful, it was blue. There is this, I'm quoting from memory, so it might not be exactly right, but Wittgenstein, this Austrian philosopher from the 20th century, whom I draw upon in the book, he imagined someone, looking up into the sky, seeing how beautiful it is, the blue color and so on, maybe some clouds, and how strange it would be to imagine that all this is just inside your head as an experience. It's not. It's out there. And you get a much richer understanding of what it means to be alive if you realize that you're part of a huge world that you can explore, that you can know, and sometimes not know, but still it's out there. not a figment of your imagination or not a construction of your neural processes and so on. So
I wish I could believe you. It's not, what you're saying is not disprovable, but even if I say it's a solipsistic universe where you don't even exist, or I don't, you can't disprove that either.
yeah, well, I don't know about
Perfectly.
yeah. um I don't know if we really need to prove it. I mean, you mentioned William James before, and James would say, like the other American pragmatists, that, well, proof. What does that mean? What we need to look at is the consequences of believing one thing or another. And my argument would be that the consequences of believing that there is a world beyond my head, which includes other people, my wife and children and the blue sky and so on, would give me a much richer and truer life than the belief that, you know, everything that exists is just within my little head.
Yeah, but it's kind of like Pascal's wager. Yeah, I would much rather believe in a God just in case there is one. Yeah, and I'm looking out at the sun and the trees now, but I have no idea whether they're out there. I mean, I like the idea that I love the idea that they really are there because it would be wonderful, but it could just as easily be the simulation. I don't know.
I wouldn't say just as easily.
Matrix. All of you guys bring up the Matrix, and I'm wondering, okay, you've been studying this all your life, but every single person I talk to, whether it's anyone who's into consciousness or quantum mechanics, no matter what it is, they always cite the Matrix.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I love the Matrix. It's a great movie, but I don't think it's a realistic possibility that humans could live like that. But I think for me, it's interesting and just sort of, yeah, it opens my mind when I think about how contingent this understanding of our lives is. You know, the understanding that what I'm basically in touch with is just the inside of my mind, some subjective experiences. This is a very peculiar idea in the history of humanity. I mean, it arose, as we talked about earlier, after the rise of mechanical natural science. It's not in the Greeks. I mean, they wouldn't understand what we're talking about. It's not in indigenous psychologies around the world. Humans have always known, because we're natural beings. We, you know, evolved with nature, and you know, it would be a very strange idea to have that what you really know about is not the world that you are in, but only what's in your mind. So I think you might be right that I can never, you know, in a fundamental way disprove it, but I can at least try to understand its historical contingency and maybe show some nicer alternatives. I point to phenomenology. I point to something called ecological psychology, which is a very nice, you know, developed by James Gibson and others, a nice approach to human cognition and perception and so on, that has, you know, a full understanding of the mind without needing, you know, to posit mental representations in some experiential world in here. No, we're out here. We live in the world because we act in it, and that's how we know it, not through passive observation of subjective experiences.
What about coming at it from the other side, which you do when you talk about, you know, the old story, what's it like to be a bat?
Right.
Because that kind of touches on what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, well, does anyone have the capability, because you kind of go between both in the book, does anyone actually have the capability of having any way of knowing what it's like to be a bat?
Yeah, this is the philosophical fantasy or thought experiment or whatever we'd like to call it by Thomas Nagel from the 70s, what it's like to be a bat. And Nagel would not argue that there is no way of knowing about the world. That's not his point. His point was that there is, in addition to that, an irreducible subjective quality to being alive. And human beings, we're one kind of species. Bats are another, and they have a sense that we don't have, just as snakes have, another sense that neither bats or humans have. So there are ways of knowing the world, of being in the world, that that are characteristic of certain species and not others. But this is not to say that they each live in their own solipsistic prison or something like that. It's just to say, at least that's my interpretation, that the world is much richer and greater than any one perspective can capture. So I think in a way it supports what I'm saying. But I might diverge from Nagel on one point. I'm not a big fan of this term that has been around in the philosophy of mind since him, and also a bit before, the term qualia, the subjective qualities of our experiences, how this coffee tastes. It's an irreducible subjective quale, as philosophers like to call it, the quale of the coffee. Only I know what coffee tastes like because only I have this quale. I think it's misguided if it means that, again, I double the world. When I drink my coffee, I actually taste the coffee. I do not taste the quale of the coffee. It might taste differently when I have COVID, sure, just as the world might look different if I put on, glasses with, I don't know, red shades or something like that. But that's not because of some inner mysterious quality. It's just because I have a different kind of access to the world. So again, my fundamental point is that we do not always have, we do not always experience the same things. But that's not because we have different subjective experiences within our minds. It's because we have different kinds of access to what is there in the world, in the layout of reality, as some philosophers call it.
If we moved away from academia and talking about philosophers and people who are experts in the philosophy of mind, and but with regard to Nagel, the one thing is the bat is sentient, we're sentient. We can't know what it's like to be a rock because the rock is not sentient, although it'd be interesting to know. But if you bring that down to what's happening in America and the world right now, suppose I'm talking to someone who's pro-life, as they say, and they believe that life begins at the moment that a sperm goes through the semi-permeable layer of an egg. And that moment, when one cell divides into two, that life begins, and that the mother, whether she's been raped or it's incest or if she's in danger, that if that life, that thing, whatever it is terminated, that they go to jail for the rest of their life. The doctor goes to jail for the rest of his life, which is what is actually happening in the United States today, which is hard for me to even state, let alone believe. My point is that to understand that person, to me, is almost like understanding a rock. There's not going to be civil discourse because we can't explain our views to each other and change them one iota. So there is, if we distill this entire book and this conversation to that one thing, whether you can take that, you could take deportation, you could take the flag. If you can't explain to the other person why they're wrong, first of all, you're the one that thinks they're wrong. They think you're wrong. The positions are so extreme. And this is something that's, as I said earlier, arithmetically increasing, aided by technology. sorry to be so long-winded. My point is, what am I supposed to do then? I can't talk to the person. I can't convince the person. And the people who are in power share that person's viewpoint or use it.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is extremely relevant. And I could go on and on about Descartes and, all this old stuff, but this is really what is important now. I was just associating while you talked before, and Tom Nagel wrote in the 70s this article. We talked about what it's like to be a bat, but you could radicalize his argument and write today about what it's like to be a Republican, what it's like to be a Democrat, what it's like to be woke, what it's like to be a woman. And
here's a good one. What it's like to be Benjamin Netanyahu, who I went to high school with.
Really?
He was a senior. Wow. I was a freshman. He was in the United States. His father was a diplomat. What is it like to be him? I have no capability. I have no qualities or tools to understand in the slightest what it's like to be him right now.
Yeah, but maybe you do. I mean, this is my point by, continuing the Nagel's titles. If we radicalize this argument, you could say, well, you don't know what it's like to be anyone but yourself, basically. And that would mean that you can never understand anyone. Not Netanyahu, not even the ones who are closest to you. And that is an awful idea. That's I hope that it's wrong, but it's the consequence of the ideology of the experience society. So we need to fight it. And to be a bit concrete, well, you talked about pro-life and this understanding that you couldn't even begin to understand. But what I think, I'm just improvising now, but often when people disagree, they focus on what the other is, what you want to attack and what they attack concerning your beliefs. If you begin by asking what the other one defends, what is the value that you are defending when you are pro-life? What is the value you're defending when you are a MAGA Republican? What is the value? Go on. I think it's easier to find a common ground. I'm not saying that everyone could agree with everyone else. That would also be quite nightmarish. But I believe that we would discover that we often defend the same things. I mean,
I'm not in the slightest saying that these are bad people, and I could use the old racist term, some of my best friends are, because some of my best friends are. I don't understand why they are. But I'm more than willing to listen to them, and I'm more than willing to have conversations with them. It's just that it's a very confusing time. Look, for example, in this conversation, I've determined in my mind that you're a decent, good person, that if I was going to buy your house and we agreed on a price and I shook your hand, we didn't have any documents or lawyers, that you would abide by the agreement and we wouldn't have any problems. But I have no idea whether I'm right or not. It's just the experience of our knowing each other virtually. It's that.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I think it was Hemingway who said that there's only one way to know if you can trust another person, and that is to trust him or her. It's like a performative phenomenon. Trust is something you do, and then sometimes you're disappointed, and I couldn't trust him. I thought I could, but it turns out that I couldn't. But quite often we can, regardless of political differences and so on. So there are certain fundamental moral values that have to exist between people that are not just They're not socially constructed, I would argue, and they're not individually constructed. They are the fabric of all social relationships. We had an agreement. I would, show up for this conversation. You would too, and we did. And now we have a nice conversation about things that we find important. But I wouldn't know. I couldn't know before if you sort of set me up for something, tried to attack me in some way. I don't know, but I trusted you even before seeing you on the screen. So we do that 99% of the time for good reasons, and we're not disappointed. And well, now I'm beginning to sound maybe too much like an optimist. You asked me that question before concerning optimism and pessimism. But I do believe that there are certain fundamental moral features, moral building blocks, whatever we'd like to call them, without which we couldn't live. And they're not just subjective and experiential. They are, holding our lives together.
It's funny because you've made me more optimistic. And the reason I do this in the first place, and have interviewed whatever I have, 1,000 people, is because my life is about, as I think life should be about, in good part, gaining information. That's what we're here to get as much information as we can. And also to learn from the information that you receive. So it's funny, I'm thinking in this conversation, I was impressed by the chair, and I was impressed by you saying the only way you can know is to trust him. So those two things are the opposite of experience in my mind. Chair is just the chair. It gives you an idea of where you are, where you were, where you're going. And trust him is just an act that there's no experience associated with it at all.
No, they are out there. I mean, the chair is an object that exists independently of you. Even its history. We have some old furniture, a rocking chair that belonged to my wife's family, and it was sort of broken, and it was very expensive to fix. And we talked about, why don't we get a new chair? I mean, it's much cheaper to get the new one. But my wife insisted that we should fix the old chair. And of course, you could reduce that to the nice experience it gives you to know that, it's sort of a chair with a certain history. But I think it's far more interesting to see it as, respect for the history of an object that exists independently of your experiences. We don't normally see it that way, but objects have this kind of history in the world, and sometimes we connect with them and experience them, certainly, but they exist regardless. People have sat in these chairs before us, and they might sit in them after we're gone. And in analogy with, well, not in analogy with, but it might be a bit similar with, human actions. The trust, as you say, is not an experience. It's something you do. It's there in the world, and you can experience it maybe in 100 different ways. It doesn't matter. What matters is the thing you do, the act itself. So I'm glad if these examples have convinced you that there's a world beyond your subjective experience.
That's a great way to end the interview, because I've learned those two things. They resonate with me. It's kind of like a bell in my head right now. So I really appreciate the book. I'm going to go back, and since I have the bookstore, it'll be out there in September on the front table, and certainly read your other works as well. So I really appreciate you being here today, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
I did too. Thank you very much. I wouldn't say that it's a great experience, because that would be to shoot myself in the foot. But well, it was actually. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. I hope we talk again soon.
I do too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.